just introduce yourself.
Okay. All right. Tell me when to go. Go like this.
3, 2, 1.
Hi, my name is Vito Pizzo. I used to be known as Vito Price, but I changed it back to my original name again because I figured, what the hell, it didn't do me any good when I was Vito Price. Anyway, I've been playing all my life. Actually, I figured it out the other day. I've been playing for over 65 years. And in all that time, I've been a professional musician. I've never deviated, chose another path. I've always played, and I've always been very fortunate because I've always worked. I became interested in music when I was about 12 years old. I used to listen to the radio, and I heard Coleman Hawkins's Body and Soul. It was very popular at that time. I used to listen to Johnny Hodges with Duke Ellington's band. And all of a sudden, I started to say to myself that I want to have a saxophone. I think I want to be a saxophone player. Not necessarily a musician, but I wanted to play the saxophone. And when I was 14 years old, I ended up with one. It was a kind of a beat old busher, and I had to get it fixed and so on and so forth. But I was very lucky because there was a teacher that lived a block away from me who was a marvelous teacher, and he got me started in the right direction. I had a good sound right from the very beginning. Anyway, I started playing with the high school band. I was playing lead alto after playing 3 months only, so you can just imagine what the band sounded like. However, I enjoyed it. I got to play with different guys, and all of a sudden, I found myself involved in playing at different sessions in the black parts of town, in Long Island. I got to be known, as a matter of fact, as the au fait tenor player. I used to travel with the subway to go and play up in Sugar Hill and in Harlem and places where they were sessions. I got to play with, what the heck was the name of that guy that had a whole bunch of, Earl Bostic. I got to play with Earl Bostic one night at Henry Armstrong's up in Sugar Hill in Harlem. That's where Duke Ellington used to live, I believe. It was a real nice section. Anyway, I played around Long Island for quite a while, and when I got out of high school, I got my first big band gig with Bob Chester's band. I was riding with Bob Chester in his Chrysler convertible, and I was sitting next to this drummer, Don McLean, who was a real maniac. And by the time we got to Philadelphia, I was feeling no pain. Anyway, the first night of the gig, I got fired. And what happened was, we started playing this thing called Zagonia, and there was a thing in the arrangement that said that I should play it if Bob Chester didn't play it. But I didn't know. I didn't know where the hell I was half the time. Anyway, after that, the thing was da 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 da. And I was supposed to play there, and there was dead silence. Every time that particular thing came up, there was dead silence. So at the end of the set, the baritone player, a guy by the name of Tony Farina, I think was his name, he was also the manager of the band. He came over to me, and he was laughing, and he said, "I'm sorry, Vito, but the old man told me that you're through." He says he might change his mind if you improve in the next week or so.
Why didn't you play that part?
Because I didn't know I was supposed to. I didn't have any experience at all. I didn't know where the hell I was half the time, Anyway, I ended up by staying on the band. I stayed on the band. He reneged on that. And I stayed on the band, and I played with some other bands. One of the best bands that I played on, actually, during that period of time was Tony Pastor. And I was jazz tenor player on the band, and it was marvelous. It was a good experience. Anyway, we ended up in Vancouver, playing in a place called The Cave. And at that particular time, I got my notice of induction to get drafted. It was during the Korean War, 1951 to be precise. I got back to New York. I had to leave the band and got back to New York and ended up in the Marine Corps band eventually, which wasn't too bad. A little boring, but it wasn't too bad. Anyway, I got out of the Marine Corps in 1953, and I ended up going to the Manhattan School of Music for a couple of years, actually 2.5 years. And at that point, I was pretty discouraged with New York. I wasn't making any inroads, you know, or between going to school, and I'm not a very political person. So I ended up, my friend Chubby Jackson, whom I had worked with during this period too, I left that out, called me. He was living in Chicago at the time and said that it might be a good idea if I went to Chicago. And so I ended up in Chicago, and no sooner had my card got valid that I got a gig with at WGN as a studio musician.
What's your card? Explain that.
Well, the musician's card. You have to have 6 months in. You have to put in for this card before you get the card. And once you have the card, then you're allowed to work.
In the
Up
union.
until that time, yeah, in the union, for union jobs, particularly recording and stuff like that, the good work. So I ended up by staying on the band for about 2.5 years, and I recorded my first album there, Swinging the Loop. Unfortunately, I never made a nickel on the thing. I wrote 5 originals for the album, but Leonard, what was his name? Leonard Chess insisted that I sign my music over to his publishing company.
Is that Chess Records?
Yeah, Chess Records.
Right.
But the album, I was with the jazz subsidiary of Chess, which was called Argo, but it was still part of the Chess Corporation. Anyway, I recorded my album then, and at that time, I got married about that time, and I thought it would be a pretty good idea to go to New York because I felt that I wanted to be a jazz saxophone player and that the accessibility of rhythm sections was better in New York than it was in Chicago. There were some good players there, but they were always busy, you know. So I signed with the Willard Alexander office and they booked me, and they didn't really do anything for me. The guy in Chicago booked me at the Preview Lounge, and then he also sent me to Las Vegas behind Chris Connors, who just recently passed away last week, as a matter of fact. And with Chris Connors, I actually, when we got back to New York, I actually played a Carnegie Hall concert with her, which was pretty awesome. It was like, you know, I can't believe what it was like standing on that stage. I was the only horn, you know. It was a rhythm section and me playing behind Chris. And it wasn't just her, it was a jazz concert. There were other people involved also. Anyway, I ended up going to Las Vegas with Tony Pastor. He put an act together, and I went to Las Vegas, and we worked at the Stardust Hotel for about 12 weeks. It was a great gig, you know, and I was very excited about it. And he had all this other work coming about, and unfortunately, when we were supposed to go back in after a while, back into the Stardust again, Tony became ill and the band broke up. So I was stranded in Vegas with a wife and 2 kids, you know. So the best thing was either to go back to New York and start all over again or stay in Vegas. And I decided to stay in Vegas because there was more opportunity there for me. The bands at that time weren't too great. There was a lot of deadwood in the bands. So I figured I had a good chance of getting on one of the bands, you know. And I did. After about 6 months or so, I ended up by working at the Dunes Hotel, which was a great band, man. I worked a lot of stars there. And we ended up by working a big production show. I also did Guys and Dolls there with Dan Daly and Betty Grable. And eventually we ended up playing this Casino de Paris show, which was a monster show. I mean, it lasted almost 2 hours, you know, and it was blowing like wall-to-wall music. I enjoyed that, but unfortunately, it eventually ended. After 30 years, there was no more music in Vegas. Anyway, I passed over some pretty important things. Let me go back.
Yeah, let's go back
Yeah,
to
I want to
New
go
York.
back. I want to go back to when I was playing with Chubby. I was playing with Chubby Jackson at the old Blue Note, the original Blue Note in Chicago, which was downstairs. And I met Charlie Parker there because he was playing with strings at that time, and Chubby knew him, and he introduced me to him. We ended up listening to him that night, and then at the end of the evening, Charlie wanted to go and play because he had been playing with strings, the same tunes over and over. And it just so happened that Georgie All's group was working at the Club Silhouette, which was on the upper north side. Anyway, we went there, and the band consisted of Tiny Khan on drums, Frank Rossellino on trombone, Georgie All on tenor, Lou Levy on piano, and Max Bennett on bass. That was the group. So when we got to the club, Georgie said to me, he said, "You want to play?" He said, "You can use my horn." I didn't have my horn. And so me, like I was about 18 or 19 years old, you know, I had what is the word? The balls. I had the balls to get up there on the same bandstand with Charlie Parker. And I'm telling you, it was an experience like none other. Like it was amazing. You know, being a saxophone player and standing next to this guy who played unbelievable. I mean, he had complete mastery of his instrument. And that particular night, he happened to be a pretty great guy too. At the end of the night, a bunch of guys, all of these people that were in the band, you know, they were talking. And I felt I was young and insecure. I didn't feel that I was a part of that group yet. So I was waiting by the bar for Chubby to come, and we were going to go back home. Anyway, Bird came walking by, and he looked at me and he said, "Vito, you're on the right track. Just keep doing what you're doing." And man, did that make me feel good. It was marvelous. I saw him a second time. I played with him a second time when I was in the Marine Corps. I was home on leave, and there was this session at a place called the Lamplighter, which was in Valley Stream. And Kay Windig was running the session. And there, Ed Shaughnessy was on drums, and I don't remember too much about the other musicians, but Bird was there also. The place was packed, and I'm sitting there. He wouldn't let me play. I went up to the trombone player and asked him if I could sit in. He said, "No, there's too many guys here, you know, I'm sorry, but you can't." So Bird came walking through the audience, and he looked at me, and he said, "Vito Price, Chicago." He says, "You got your horn with you, man?" And I said, "Yes, I do, but he doesn't want me to." He says, "Just take your horn out, come up to the bandstand with me." So I got there, and I got to play with Bird again. It was unbelievable, you know.
What do you think when he said, "Vito, you're on the right track"? I know it's a mentor kind of saying you're doing good. Do you remember how you played at that time and what might have resonated with you?
Well, Chubby bawled me out after that because he thought that I was trying to play like Bird, you know, and perhaps I was, because you know it was so the relationship and the atmosphere was so heavy with his playing that a little of it brushed off on me, you know. Up until that point, I was more or less a Prez type player, you know, or Coleman Hawkins type player. But then, like after that, I started playing some bebop, you know. And then I got to tell you a funny story.
Well, let me just ask you this though: what's the difference between a Coleman Hawkins type player and a Prez type player? Is that
okay? Yeah.
In your mind?
Well, Coleman Hawkins, was actually the first really great saxophone player, and his thing was he had a great big sound, It was like he didn't record very well because his sound was too big, you know, but he was also a chordal player. You know, he knew his changes, and he was up and down, and he was fantastic. Now, Prez had an entirely different sound, and he played more melodically. Instead of up and down, he played this way, up and down around the melody, you know. And I really started taking to him because, you know, everybody that was coming up in the saxophone scene at that time, there was Stan Getz, Zoot Sims, Al Cohen, there's at least a half a dozen other guys. They all emulated, or they came out of Prez rather than Coleman Hawkins. Like, you know, you listen to all these people, you go back to the originators, and then you listen to all these other people, and then you assimilate your own sound and your own feeling about what you're going to do with the tune, you know. I really feel that most of the young guys today that are playing, they're so they have so much technical facility. They also have so much more knowledge than I have even today. They're so well schooled, but they started with John Coltrane instead of going all the way back to the beginning and assimilating all these other sounds. John Coltrane did that, and he got to play the way he plays, the way he was playing, you know. And then he went off in his own direction.
Right. So you feel you were more of a Hawk player than a Lester Young player? Is that, I mean, if that's maybe...
Well,
maybe...
I started out that way. But I became more of a Lester Young player as time went by. And then I heard Charlie Parker, of course, you know, for the first time when I was in New York at 52nd Street. And, you know, it was an assimilation of different styles and sounds that make you do what you do. I've always been very, very particular about my sound. I've always wanted to have a good sound, you know. And actually, if you have to fight your sound, you can't really play, you can't really create, because you're so busy worrying about whether or not it's going to come out right, you know.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm gonna run to Home Depot because Christina's here.
Okay.
So I'll be back in 20 minutes.
Okay.
Is that cool?
All right. Anyway,
So you're gonna...
I did play with Lester Young one time.
Wow.
Yeah, he was playing at a hall in Freeport, Long Island. Oh no, in Hempstead. It was in Hempstead, and I used to know these guys that ran these dances, these black guys, you know, and they liked me. So I used to go to all the places that they had these dances, you know, and I got to play with a lot of great musicians because of that. So I walked in with my horn, and the guy says, "Come on, man, get up there with Prez, get up there with Prez." So I went up there. I didn't even ask him if I could play. I took out my horn and I got up on the bandstand, and he looked at me. He said, "Okay." He kind of like said I could play, you know, and he was cool. He didn't say a word to me, you know. He didn't say one single solitary word. I did what I did, and then I got off, you know. And
what year was this?
Well, that was about the time. I imagine between high school and before I went into the service. So it must have been sometime between 48, 49, 50, 51, something like that, around that early period.
Right.
I got another funny story.
Yeah.
Stan Getz lived in Long Island, you know, and he was playing at this bar. They used to have these bars, you know, where they'd have a little bandstand like behind the bar. And I went down there because I knew he was down there. And at this time, he had a modicum of success. He still wasn't, you know, as well known as he became. But anyway, I went there and I took out my horn. I did the same thing. I went up on the bandstand. At this time, I was only playing maybe about 3 or 4 years, you know. And he looked at me, you know, and I kept playing and playing and playing. Didn't say a word to me, you know. I got off the bandstand. About a year or two later, I played at this session late at night at the jazz club that Chubby owned in Valley Stream called the Esquire Club. And Stan Getz was there. I played, and he looked at me, and he came over to me, and he said, "You know, you sounded better than you did the last time," which was probably true, you know. It was amazing because my friend Jack Edstrom, who was a piano player, had one of those old wire recorders, you know, and he recorded the session. But unfortunately, his brother-in-law recorded over it. You know, it would have been such a wonderful thing to have. You know.
Let me just point this mic a little more. So did you? Actually, I've never asked you this. Do you have any home recordings of any of these
No.
sessions or nothing? The only
No,
time
I
you
don't.
recorded was in a studio or
Right.
with the big band. Or,
Right. Exactly.
So you never actually got.
But the
to-
only other time I was recorded was when I was at the WGN. And like, but you know, who the hell knows what happened to all those things? I was with this big band there. It was a great band, and I was the jazz tenor player. I was featured all the time on the band. But I don't know what happened to those.
Those were
tapes.
live, right?
Yeah, they
Right.
were live. They were live,
Like
and they were
broadcasts.
recorded. They were recorded by the engineer, you know.
Right.
So they were probably great recordings. Anyway, after Vegas, you know, Vegas was a great experience because I got to play with great bands. You know, a lot of great bands and great musicians, like the Stars. One time I tried to figure out how many Stars I played, and I got up to about 147, I think.
Wow.
You know, because I was there for 30 years. You know, and you know, you name it, and I played them.
Who are the big ones you got to play?
Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Jimmy Durante, Peggy Lee, Lena Horne, Tony Bennett. You know, I can't even think of them right now. And a lot of them, like Mitzi Gaynor, you know, where they were like little mini production shows, you know. But playing with some of those, like Lena Horne, for example, she had a big string section, and there was a lot of woodwind stuff, you know. I mean, the orchestrations and the arrangements were just absolutely beautiful, man. You know, I want to inject something right now. I feel really bad about the young people today not having ever been exposed to that kind of music, you know. I remember, for example, when I was in Chicago, working at WGN, which was between 1955 or 56, 7, and 8, and 9, in that time frame. I used to go to the Blue Note, the big Blue Note, which I worked there at one time also. I worked at both Blue Notes. And I used to hear Duke's band. I used to hear Basie's band. When they were at their peaks. They were playing like, the sound was unbelievable, man. And then every other jazz musician that you can think of played at this place. Stan Getz was there. And, I mean, people who are not exposed to that kind of music don't know what they've missed in life. You know, today, you know, I understand that music goes through cycles and it changes, so on and so forth. But unfortunately, they've practically done away with acoustical instruments, you know. And a band today consists of a couple of guitars, a lead guitar player and another guitar player, a bass, an electronic synthesizer or organ or whatever, and a drummer. That's the band. You can only get so many sounds with that kind of a band, you know? Whereas with the acoustical instruments, like saxophone players, for example, were required, like in Vegas, to play doubles. Like you had to play clarinet, flute, piccolo, or clarinet and oboe, or the baritone player would play baritone, bass clarinet. There was a time period where alto flutes were popular, and also bass flutes. You know, I mean, it was the variation of sounds that could come out of an orchestra were infinitesimal.
I remember one time you said something that made a lot of sense that I had never thought about before, which is to you probably just the normal thing, which is the difference between hearing someone live and hearing someone on record, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, even you're saying, you know, Coleman Hawkins didn't record so good because of his sound.
Right,
But
exactly.
we would never, if we didn't get to hear that live, we would never understand that.
Right, exactly. And I used to hear him on 52nd Street, you know, so I heard him live several times.
But talk about these guys, like hearing a great band live versus hearing it on record. What's the difference?
It's like, it's electric, man. It's like, it's like the difference between electricity and not having any, you know, like something being flat, you know. You know, even with the electronics that you have today, and I must admit, you know, I'm into iPods now, and I don't even listen to music. I gave away my sound system. I don't like to listen to music through a sound. I like to listen to it through earphones, because you're right there. That's the closest thing. That's actually the closest thing to listening to live music, because you're there and you can hear all of the horns. You can hear the horns. You can hear the various sections. You know, the rhythm section. I mean, I'm absolutely astonished by that electronics. Like you know, I recorded my entire CD collection on one of my iPods, on the one that's 120 gigabytes. I mean, my entire collection, about over 1,200 albums. I had other albums too, which I didn't, like tapes and stuff. But my CDs, I got them all on iPods. And it's wonderful, man. But you know, getting back to kids, like, oh, I know. I read an article that was written by the president of the Las Vegas Union, who's like his name is Frank Leone. He's a great jazz piano player, this guy. And he wrote this article about why jazz is like on the downturn, you know, and like he doesn't know if it's ever really going to come back. Because number one, the young people today who have money, like they want to go to rock concerts. They want to go and hear the kind of music that they used to hearing. And in order to get into a jazz club, $dollars or something like that, like it. So they're not willing to spend the money for that. Like we have to have some kind of government subsidy, you know, like they have over in Europe, you know, like look at that Netherlands orchestra that they have. Boy, I'd love to record with them, man. You know the orchestra I'm talking about?
A jazz orchestra?
Well, it's a big orchestra.
Concertgebouw.
They have strings and there's a big band, and then there's the thing with the string section, you know. It's kind of like a pop orchestra, but it also has jazz musicians in it, you know.
Right.
From Amsterdam, I guess it is,
right,
the Netherlands. And all of the big jazz players have recorded with this orchestra. Well, I was listening to something the other night. The guy that used to play with Lenny Tristano, the alto player,
Lee Konitz.
Yeah, Lee Konitz. Lee Konitz recorded with them, and I never really liked Lee Konitz, to be perfectly honest. Not that I didn't like him, I didn't like his style, you know. I know he's a great musician, but he sounded entirely different with this orchestra, and I like what he did, you know. He was in a different setting. He was in a different setting, and he sounded wonderful on some of the things that he did. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have so many different sounds, you know. There were guys that emulated Charlie Parker, but then there were guys like Sonny Stitt, and there were guys like Sonny Rollins. You know, he's like one of the last lions alive now. One time he in Chicago, and I was living in Chicago. I went to a jazz concert and a jam session at the university that's right downtown. I forget the name. I guess it's called Chicago University or Chicago College or something. And who was there but Sonny Rollins he was in one of his funks, you know. He didn't even own a horn. And I had met Sonny in New York casually, you know. But he remembered me. He came up to me and he said, "Vito, do you mind if I use your horn, man?" So I said, "Okay, as long as I can see you." But I gave him my horn, and he went up and he played, you know, and he gave me my horn back. But he played my horn. He played the horn I have today.
Did he have a reputation of stealing guys' horns?
Oh yeah, he was like, but you know, he was a junkie, man. During you know, when a guy's a junkie, they do things that they wouldn't normally do in order to get junk. You know, there was a big heroin scene in those days. It wasn't just snorting coke or smoking pot. guys were injecting heroin into their arms. That was the high of the jazz musician, you know. And it was very unfortunate. I can't believe that I got out of that era unscathed. You know, I smoked a little pot, you know, but I didn't. I liked it, you know, but I wasn't too crazy about it. I used to like to have a drink once in a while. But when I was in Chicago with Chubby, we played at this very famous old place that Louis Armstrong played at with Buddy Bolden, or the guy that he used to play with. It was a wild old place. It was built like in the late 1800s. I forget the name of it, and we were there. The two bands were there. I was there with Chubby's band, and Georgie Ole was there. And there was nobody there that night, you know. It was a complete bomb. But anyway, I was up in the band room, and Georgie Ole was like snorting coke, you know. He says, "Come on, Vito, have some." "Nah, I don't want any, you know, I don't want any." Another time, one of my dear friends, Jerry Tomlinson, who was a great drummer, man. Did you ever hear him? Jerry Tomlinson. He had a gimp arm, but he was a great drummer. And we used to go down his cellar. You know, he was living with his parents. I was still going to school then, and we listened to records and smoked pot, you know. But then he started getting on junk. And one day I was there, and he came out and he said to me, "Vito, you want to get high?" And he had everything right in his hands. And I said, "No, Jerry, I don't think so." So he said, "Okay," and he went into the little bathroom that they had there and got high himself, you know. But he introduced me to a lot of great music. He really got me into Prez. He got me into Prez. He got me into Bird, you know, really got me into Bird. He lived in St. Albans, which was actually a place where a lot of the black musicians lived that was successful. I think Ella Fitzgerald had a home there. Ella Fitzgerald and I don't know who else right off the top of my head. But
well, let's talk about one thing that you haven't discussed was you mentioned your record, but you want to talk about how that came together and how it felt doing that record, because it came out to be a pretty damn good record.
Yeah, you're talking about the first record, right?
The one in the 50s.
The one in the 50s.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. There was a wonderful arranger at WGN who helped me a great deal on this. His name was Bill. Oh God, I can't even think of his name now. He did the arrangements for the 10-piece, the 12. You know, it was a 10-piece band, I think. We had 2 trumpets, 2 bones, baritone sax, and I played tenor and alto on a couple of them. But this was 6 horns and 4 rhythm, guitar, drums, bass, and piano. Anyway, I had written about 5. I picked out some of the stuff. I've been doing some writing at that time, and I picked out 5 of the things that I wanted to record. And then I was very, very careful about picking the songs too. I didn't want to get songs that were overly done, you know. And so anyway, I got together with Bill. He wrote the charts, and when I got to negotiate the contract, in those days, the record company paid for the recording session. You know, it wasn't like it is today where everybody records themselves. You know, and in order to get a recording session, you know, I was a young guy. I was thrilled about the fact that I was going to have my own record date. Now I had worked at Argo with Chubby's big band, and I played 2 or 3 albums with him at Argo, and that's how come they heard me play, and they decided to give me a recording session. Anyway, I was very careful about the guys that I picked. I chose a time when Ella Fitzgerald was in town, and her rhythm section, of course, consisted of Max Bennett, Gus Johnson, and Lou Levy. And Basie was in town at the same time too, so I was able to get Freddie Green on guitar, you know. So that was my rhythm section. Then as far as the horns were concerned, there were guys from the station, you know. I had Johnny Howell, was a marvelous lead trumpet player, and Bill Bill Stanley, I think his name was. He used to play like Sweets Edison. He was a marvelous player. And Barrett O'Hara played bass trombone, and another guy played trombone. I forget his name off the top of my head. And a baritone player. Anyway, you know, I figured I was going to make some money on it because I had some originals on there. But he says, you know, he says, if you want to make this record session, he says, you're going to have to sign over your tunes to our company. You know, that was it. That was the end of any kind of stuff that I could have gotten from anything. You know.
What was the?
I signed away the publishing rights.
Right. Was there in those days, jazz records were much different than they are today, in that you look at the guys that played back in the 40s and 50s, they were making several records a year, the stars, the big guys, right? So as opposed, you know, nowadays people make a record, it takes a long time.
Oh yeah, no.
You were in the midst of all this great music coming out. So what was there a response to your record? Did you hear it played on the radio? How did it work?
Yeah, I got you know, I had some write-ups from the San Francisco Chronicle and Billboard, you know, and some other papers, and Downbeat did my album. But you know what? At that time, my album came out right after Ahmad Jamal's album came out. And Ahmad Jamal's album, his first album, became the #1 jazz album in the country. And they put all of their marketing behind him. And there was a guy that came there, a new A&R man by the name of Dave Usher. And he loved my album, you know. And he set me up with some live interviews, you know. As a matter of fact, he took me to Detroit. I went to Detroit, you know. And they sold some albums there, but I never found out how many. I never really knew. And it wasn't until I was in Vegas many years later that this guy, Frank Leone, who's the president of the union now, he was just a piano player in Vegas, and he was from Philadelphia. And when he went home to Philadelphia to visit his mother, he says, you know, I was in a record store, man. He says, and I saw your album being sold. It was still the original album. It was still like on it wasn't on CD yet, you know, on vinyl. And I said, really? Now this is like probably, I recorded in 1958, and this is probably in the late 60s. The late 60s that I discovered that they were still selling my album, you know. So I wrote to the record company, you know, that I wanted to have some kind of I wanted to know what had happened. Give me some paper. Let me know what's going on, you know. But they you know, they sent me something. Well, you know, we gave away a lot of stuff, and you got to pay for your album first before we can give you any kind of royalties. That was the deal. You had to pay for everything. Everything had to be paid for before I was going to make a cent.
Of course.
Now, if I had my tunes, my 5 tunes, I would have made money though, through the publishing rights.
Now, after that record, did you you went back to Vegas?
No, from that point on, I had just gotten married. I went back to New York. I signed with Willard Alexander, as I talked about earlier. And I went to New York, and I bombed out, man. I had a couple of kids. I wasn't working, so I had to go back on the road again. And I went back on the road with Tony Pastor. And I ended up in Las Vegas. That was in 1959, the end of 1959. And I stayed in Vegas for 30 years, till the end of 1958, almost 29 years.
And in those 30 years, did you have the itch to make another record as a soloist, or did it just not come to fruition in that way?
You know, I was a family man. I was making my living playing music. I was getting a check every week, you know, and I was living comfortably. I owned a couple of houses, you know, before I got divorced. and I was into the kids, you know, and I was also into my job, you know, like it was I never knew what was going to happen next, man. Like when I was playing it with these different shows, you get new music all the time, and it was wonderful. I was enjoying it. I started getting a little bored when I was playing the French show, because you're playing the same music
Which
for
show?
the Casino de Paris show at the Dunes. And you're playing the same music for a year. Like every once in a while they'll change a few acts,
Right.
but it's the same music, big production numbers, and you play the acts. But you have to. Some guys went crazy, man. They couldn't do it. You have to approach a show, even if you played it over and over again. You have to approach it as though you're playing it for the first time. You got to do it. Some guys. There was a guy, a lead alto player, who almost went crazy. He started listening to a trombone player, and then he would start listening to a saxophone player who had different pitches that he thought like were not correct. Instead of, pitch is a relative thing. It's in like a ball here. There's no such thing as perfection when pitch comes into power. But this guy had perfect pitch, evidently. And he was going crazy, man. He went up to the leader and he told the leader, he said, he says, I want you to get rid of this guy, and I want you to get, what happened? He got fired.
Vito, hold on
Yeah.
one second. So maybe just remind us where you were growing up and how old you were and all
Okay.
that.
All right, getting back to my early days in Long Island. We moved to Long Island. My mother got married again. I was about 16, so I'd been playing a couple of years then. Anyway, somehow this guy got my number. His name was Percy Treadwell. He was an older drummer. At the time he was about 45 years old, and he had this gig out in I don't know, it was Bayshore. I think it was Bayshore, Long Island, but it was a roadhouse in the middle of a potato field. Like the guy didn't even have a license, He obviously was paying off the guys, But guess who the piano player was?
Who?
The piano player was Fats Waller's son, Maurice Waller.
Wow.
Maurice Waller. And he didn't play anything like his father. Like he played more like Thelonious Monk, He was into Bud Powell and Monk. Anyway, he used to come and pick me up, and he'd drive me out. He'd have like a fifth of gin, and pot in the car. And he'd be like, by the time we got to the place, we were completely out of it. Percy, to give you an idea what this place was like, on the bandstand, there was a sink on the bandstand, an old sink. And Percy, the first thing he did was he would get a broom and he would sweep the bandstand off. and then he set up his drums, and you have never seen drums like this in your life. He had the Chinese tom-tom. He had the hi-hat with that was like just a foot thing, It's a foot hi-hat, a huge bass drum with a tray on top of it, and a snare drum. That was it. And when we started to play, man, we used to play on Maid's Night Out and on Saturday night, or maybe Friday and Saturday, I'm not sure. Either 2 or 3 nights a week we were working there. But you have no idea of what that place was rocking. I'm telling you, the whole house used to shake, man. The dancing and the happiness and it was just absolutely marvelous. It was. And another place in Long Island that I used to play was out in Freeport. A place, it was originally called the Cotton Inn, and it was nicknamed the Bucket of Blood because there were always fights there. Guns, and that was a dangerous place, man. They had a security guard full time, with a gun. And I worked there. I used to work there with a guy by the name of King Alfonso. Great alto player. I don't know if you remember Pete Smith, but he played along that side. And also, what was the name of that funny guy that played saxophone and had the group? He did What's the Use of Getting Sober? And anyway, He was very, very popular for a while. I'll think of his name in a second. He played alto like that. He was a whaler, man. And he had a great piano player. Hambone Peterson was the piano player. And it was a marvelous place. And later on, the Celebrity Club in Harlem, which was on 125th Street in Harlem, bought this place and completely did it over. And at that point, they had shows there, like Ruth Brown used to be there, and Buddy Tate had the house band. Remember Buddy Tate? He used to be with Basie. Mm-hmm. And I used to go and play with him every weekend. I'd just go and sit in with the band, you know. And he was marvelous. He was just what a great guy he was. And the musicians, they were very helpful. I was very young at the time. And that's where I met Chubby. Chubby lived in Freeport, and he used to come into this place all the time, and he'd grab the bass and get in the middle of the floor, and I'd go in the middle of the floor and honk and scream, you know. And it was a great feeling, man. I used to go up to Harlem during this period too. I used to go up to Sugar Hill, this place up in Sugar Hill called Henry Armstrong's. He was a middleweight contender, I think. He won the middleweight crown at one time, and he bought this bar, Henry Armstrong's, and he had a big place upstairs, like a big where they had bands, you know, and Earl Bostic used to play up there, and I went and played with Earl Bostic one night. He was a very scholarly guy, like he looked like he was a school teacher, you know. Very, very dark guy. He was really black, you know, but he was the nicest man, very sweet man, you know. And I got to play with him. It was a kick. I played in Jamaica, Long Island a lot at a place called the Catalina Ballroom. Saxophone players like John Hardy, who was a great saxophone player, man. I played with what's his name there, a wonderful saxophone player that ended up by going to Paris and living there for years and years and years. He was like a Coleman Hawkins type, but he had a pure sound, and I can't think of his name. Anyway, Sir Charles Thompson on piano was one of the guys that was there, and everybody in the place was stoned, man. It was unbelievable, you know.
How would you get up there from Long Island?
I had a car. I had an old car. I had an old car at the time, and I used to drive up there in this car, you know.
What kind of car?
But going up to the city, you know, I used to drive the car to Jamaica, and then take the subway from Jamaica, and I would go up to Harlem, up to 125th Street. I used to go play at the Celebrity Club on 125th Street. I used to go to Golden Gate Ballroom in Harlem. I used to go to the Apollo Theater. And when I used to walk through the streets, you know, I'd get there a lot of times before it was dark. And I'd be carrying my horn. And there were a lot of people sitting out on their stoops, you know, and they say, hey, there's a white saxophone player there. And I mean, it was a very friendly time, you know. I never had any problems with anyone. It was amazing, you know. My saxophone was like my ticket into Harlem, you know. I didn't have any problems.
Did you ever? You talked about all these great jazz musicians you got to sit in with, like Prez and Bird and Stan Getz, and you had Freddie Green on your record.
Yeah.
Who? Any other people that come to mind, like that are really these glorious players that had a special little meeting or contact with it?
Well, great saxophone player. Oh God, what was his name now? Buddy something. Buddy. He lived in Jamaica, and I played with him a couple of times at a bar in Flushing, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know. It was on that main boulevard. What's that name of that boulevard that goes up the island?
I know what you're talking.
Yeah.
I forget it.
Anyway, forget it. Buddy Johnson.
Okay.
Buddy Johnson. He was a well-known saxophone player, man. He had worked with some of the big bands, the big black bands. I forget which ones, you know. But he had a big sound, and he was a nice man, you know. I played with Clark Terry one time at this place in Jamaica, at the Catalina Ballroom.
What about vocalists? I know you worked with all these big vocalists in Vegas. Did you ever have a moment where you got to, I don't know, either play with in a small combo or even talk to someone like, you know, a Billie Holiday or Sarah Vaughan or Frank Sinatra?
Yes, I met Billie Holiday. Mal Waldron was her accompanist in Vegas. And I had met Mal Waldron at one of these places, you know, like either in Jamaica or somewhere, one of the sessions.
Yeah.
And he remembered me, and I went up and I said hello to him, and he was backing Billie Holiday. This was at the Sahara Lounge, actually. And he says, come on, man. He says, I'll introduce you to the lady. And she came down, you know, she was finished with the set, and she was going to go to her room. And he introduced me to her, and she was very gracious and very charming. And he had to walk her to her room because she was so out of it, man. She was really out of it.
What do you think? What was she doing? She just.
I don't know. I have the vaguest idea.
Yeah.
I have the vaguest idea. But she was nice. I heard her sing again in Long Island at the Cork and Bib because you know she couldn't work in the city because she didn't have a card. You know, in those days they had cabaret cards, and if you had ever gotten arrested, they wouldn't let you have a cabaret card. So she could never perform at places like Birdland or any of the theaters in New York. So she was relegated to like Long Island or to other areas of the country.
Wow, that's what a shame.
Yeah, yeah, it's a shame, man. Oh, and I met Jerry Mulligan. I met Jerry Mulligan one time through my friend Jerry Tomlinson, the drummer. He was tight with Jerry because they were both scoring horse. Well, Jerry Mulligan was so bugged because guys used to come over to his place and bother him when he was trying to work. Because at this time he was doing a lot of writing for big bands, you know. And so what he did was he got an apartment that was so small that you could only fit about 2 people in it. You know, I went into his place with Jerry Tomlinson one time. I'll never forget it. He had a single bed against the wall. He had a big upright piano. And there was just space for one person to like go to bed or to play the piano. And it was like a table for one person. That was the apartment, man. And he was very nice. So actually, he heard me play on a blindfold test that they used to do, and he didn't know who I was, but he liked the way I played, and he mentioned that I would be an asset to any big band. Yeah. That was the downbeat blindfold.
Right. They still do those.
Yeah. And another thing, you know, my album. I don't know if you know this, but the album cover was one of the first action covers that was ever done, maybe in the jazz field or in any field in the recording industry. And it was done by this guy, Don Bronstein, who was the main photographer for Playboy magazine. And he had me all over the place, man. I wish I would have had those original pictures because they were. There was one picture where I was sitting, I was playing in the middle of Michigan Boulevard, and there was this old Italian sweeper, paying no attention to me whatsoever. You know? We did some on the L and all over. He must have taken about 50 or 60 shots of me. Right. And anyway, that particular album cover won the Jazz Album Cover of the Year.
Cool.
Unfortunately, it wasn't the jazz album of the cover.
Right. Now on that record, what's so, one of the great things about listening to that record is not only are the tunes great and it's swinging and everything, but you're taking some pretty burning solos on it.
Yeah.
And I've even played it for some of my buddies who are, you know, young saxophone players, and it's, you know, everyone really responds well to it. I was
playing a lot. Right. I was playing I was playing a lot of jazz in the band where I was working.
Right.
One time I walked into the studio, and there was a huge picture of me. Like, I couldn't believe it. It was like about 12 feet high. I wonder what happened to that thing. I would have liked to have had it.
But did you go through different periods? Because you recorded a record recently.
Yeah,
where you're
I did.
soloing.
Yes, I did.
So did you go through periods of time where you felt like I'm soloing a lot, and so I want it on a record, or sometimes you're not so?
Yeah. Well, you know, I really didn't want to record again until I met my wife, Chris. She's the one that told me I should record again, actually. And if it wasn't for her, I couldn't do the date. It cost a lot of money, man. It was about 15 grand, you know. But I chose the songs very, very carefully. And my friend Don Hanna, who passed away this year, he was like, he did the arrangements for the strings, you know, 5 string. He conducted them. He sat in the booth, you know. He was like, he was there for me, man. You know, you need help. You can't do it all yourself, you know. I picked out the tunes. When I did the date, I didn't feel as sharp as I could have felt. You know, I was a little nervous, and it turned out okay, but it could have been better. You know, I was sharper. I was sharper because I was playing more during the days of my first album. You know, you have to be playing. A professional jazz musician has to be a professional jazz musician. He's got to play all the time. If you don't do that, you can play, but you're rusty. You're not playing up to your capacity, or your top capacity, you know. Anyway, it came out okay. I picked out some really beautiful songs, you know, and there were a couple of things that turned out okay. I picked out a rhythm section on the small group thing of guys that I had worked with, you know, and a wonderful guitar player, Joe Lano, great guitar player. He was wonderful, and a great bass player and a piano player and the drummer. The drummer like worked at the Sahara for years and years and years. A swinging drummer, man. Anyway, we did it all in two sessions, 3-hour sessions. Did the whole Megillah. Like, as a matter of fact, when we did the jazz sides, we had about 45 minutes left over. You know, I mean, you got people who are going to record you that are good. You know, they know what they're doing with the dials, and you know they put together a couple of things. They splice together like a couple of different versions, maybe, but you know, there's no reason why you can't record like a session in 3 hours.
Right.
You know, there's no reason.
In the old days, that's what they did.
That's what they did.
Walk in, you play.
3 hours, you go in there and you play.
Right.
That's the way it was. You might run through it while the guy's checking the dials, you know, and then you play it.
Yeah.
Maybe you do it in one take, maybe you do it in 2 or 3, but you do it pretty fast, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, right now I'm still playing. I did some work which last season, which I really had a lot of fun with this desert jazz band on Sunday afternoons at this Vicky's restaurant in Indian Wells, which is a high-end restaurant, you know. And this band has been playing there. I think it was their 3rd season last year. But I was the main saxophone player. Don Sheldon, who's a wonderful player. He was a singer with the Hi-Los and the New York Voices.
Yeah.
And he's a wonderful saxophone player. He's a lead alto player, great clarinet player. Well, he was the main source. And the only time I worked with him was when he took off. And he used to take off a lot because the gig didn't pay that much. And he used to get recording sessions and jobs that paid a lot more money. He'd just take off, you know. But there was a great trumpet player on there and an excellent trombone player. And Bobby Corwin played. You know Bob Corwin at all?
You know, I know the name.
Great piano player. He plays like he's like what is the guy that was so marvelous that he played behind Tony Bennett?
Bill Evans.
Bill Evans. He's kind of a Bill Evans type of player. beautiful. He
Yeah.
plays. He's a beautiful accompanist. So like when you play with him, he's accompanying you.
Sure.
He's not in competition trying to figure out weird chords. He goes with you, you know, and he's a great soloist too. And the guy who's the leader is a guy by the name of Alan Goodman, who was a big contractor in Los Angeles and New York at one time, and a pretty good drummer, you know, not the greatest, but not bad. I hope he doesn't see this. But the audiences at Vicky's were the greatest audiences like that I have ever come across in my life, jazz-wise. These people were real jazz fans, like all older people, like in their 60s, you know, 70s, some in their 80s, who loved jazz. And they would go to Vicky's without fail every single Sunday afternoon. You play a solo, they'd clap, like at the end of the tune, like, yay, yay. I mean, it was unbelievable, man. That really fed the ego, you know, to be appreciated.
Right.
Anyway, so I'm still playing. Don't play as much as I used to. I'd like to play a lot more, but unfortunately I don't get as many calls as I did, because even the music scene is changing even in Palm Springs now. Whereas the country clubs used to be places where they like to hear standards, you know, the great songbook from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, you know. Now you've got what do they call them? The ones that grew up during the war, the baby boomers. Mm-hmm. The baby boomers are taking over, and they're into Elvis Presley and rock and so on and so forth. So the young guys who are playing rock and they don't need to make money. You know, that's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're playing rock. I don't want to do that. That's the way. I don't need to do it, and I don't want to do it. I can do it, and I have done it, but I don't need to do it anymore. You know,
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
There's too much beautiful music to play, man. I mean, when you sit down and look at the songs that were written in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, man, Cole Porter, Jimmy Van Heusen, the guy that wrote Stardust, Hoagie Carmichael, Berlin. You know, I mean, my God, it goes on and on. It goes on and on. I mean, there's just so many beautiful songs to play. You know, why go that other direction? You know. Anyway, if I ever do another album, I don't know if I ever will, but if I ever do another album, I'm going to think about what I'm going to do. I haven't got it in mind yet. I was thinking, one of the things I was thinking about was the possibility. You know, I like Willie Nelson, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. I like some of the songs that he wrote. He wrote some songs that are beautiful, man. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking of, it could conceivably be a crossover album, you know. Yeah. You never give up, you know. You never give up, man. But, you know, like a crossover album, like a jazz album with Willie Nelson tunes, you know. Yeah. And think about what kind of cover you're going to have and so on and so forth. That's just one idea that I was kicking around, but there's other stuff too.
Well,
that's about it, huh?
Yeah, well, you know, it's amazing your timing, because it says I'm running out of tape right now. So
okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. I mean, this is great. This is just so
you
great.
can put together stuff the way you want it.